Thank you all for coming today. We're ready to start this first meeting of the Joint Study Committee on Transparency and Open Access in Government, which was brought about by Senate Resolution 130. Before we begin, I would ask Senator Albers if he would lead us in an invocation.
Thank you. Please bow your heads. Most gracious and Heavenly Father, we come before you today and ask for your blessings upon this committee and the work we'll do for the people of Georgia. But specifically, we make our prayers right now for all those who are suffering or in the path of Hurricane Irma. We ask that you put a hedge of protection around each one of the citizens that are departing and all the first responders and National Guard and those that will be rushing in to help. We make all these prayers in your most holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Senator Albers. And we want to first have the members of the committee introduce themselves. So I guess since you're lit up, I'm not sure if we can make all these buttons hit for everybody, but we'll find out. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairman. My name is John Albers. I represent the 56th District in the Georgia Senate, which is the majority of North Fulton County and Southeast Cherokee County, and I have a technology background. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Senator Renee Enterman, and I represent Senate District 45 from Northern Gwinnett County.
Again, I'm Representative Brett Harrell from the 106th District, which is South Gwinnett County.
And Chuck Hufstetler, co-chair of this committee and senator from Rome, Georgia.
I'm Katie Dempsey. I'm co-chairing this with Senator Hufstetler. Thank y'all for being here today, especially in light of what's going on outside. I am also from Rome and parts of Floyd County in the House. Thank you.
And I'm Senator Jeff Mullis from extreme Northwest Georgia. I'm proud to be here today.
I'm State Representative Pat Gardner. I represent the city of Atlanta.
Okay. What's the mic number down there, Calvin? You got three? Okay, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Calvin Rose, Chief Information Officer for the state of Georgia, appointed by the governor to serve on this committee.
Go ahead.
I'm Patty Laveley. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Gwinnett Health System in Gwinnett County.
Patrick Mayer. I'm Principal Consultant for a group called Trust Point Solutions out of Suwanee.
Gary Dent, President CEO of South Georgia Radiology Associates.
Anu Jan, General Manager of Think Big Analytics, a Teradata company.
Joe Zemmel, CIO for business unit within Change Healthcare.
All right. Well, we appreciate everyone being here. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator came in. What's your number down there? 27.
State Senator Freddie Powell Sims from way down South Georgia, District 12.
Probably the longest drive here, I
yeah.
bet. Yeah, and a slow drive with the traffic, I'm sure.
I was on 19 where there were no cars. We need to redirect traffic. It's a beautiful scenic highway, 4 lanes.
Great.
No traffic.
Well, we were gonna play a little 5-minute YouTube clip here. It's from actually a guy that does a marriage retreat seminar over the weekend. So if you're having trouble in your marriage, you might want to hear the whole thing. But we're gonna start with just this little 5-minute clip. It is applicable, as you'll see, I think.
We're going to start discussing men's brains, women's brains, and how they're very different from each other. Now, I want to start with men's brains. All right? Now, men's brains are very unique. Men's brains are made up of little boxes. And we have a box for everything. We've got a box for the car. We've got a box for the money. We've got a box for the job. We've got a box for you. We've got a box for the kids. We've got a box for your mother somewhere in the basement. We got boxes everywhere. And the rule is the boxes don't touch. When a man discusses a particular subject, we go to that particular box, we pull that box out, we open the box, we discuss only what is in that box, all right? And then we close the box and put it away, being very, very careful not to touch any other boxes. Now, women's brains are very, very different from men's brains. Women's brains are made up of a big ball of wire. And everything is connected to everything. The money's connected to the car, and the car's connected to your job, and your kids are connected to your mother, and everything's connected to everything. And it's like... It's like the internet superhighway, okay? And it's all driven by energy that we call emotion. It's just... It's one of the reasons why women tend to remember everything. Because if you take an event and you connect it to an emotion, it burns in your memory and you can remember it forever. The same thing happens for men. It just doesn't happen very often because, quite frankly, we don't care. Women tend to care about everything. And she just loves it. Okay? Now, men, we have a box in our brain that most women are not aware of. This particular box has nothing in it. In fact, we call it the nothing box. And of all the boxes a man has in his brain, the nothing box is our favorite box. If a man has a chance, he'll go to his nothing box every time. That's why a man can do something seemingly completely brain dead for hours on end. You know, like fishing. Now, they've actually measured this. The University of Pennsylvania a couple of years ago did a study and discovered that men have the ability to think about absolutely nothing and still breathe. You know, they connected all the wires and stuff like that and watched their brain activity, then all of a sudden, I think he's dead. Huh? You know, women can't do it. They can't do it. Their minds never stop. And they don't understand the nothing box. And it drives them crazy. Because nothing drives a woman more crazy or makes her feel more irritated than to witness a man doing nothing.
All right, well, that clip could go on for a while, but you're welcome to look at some of that later on if you have an interest in it. But the point with that is we do have in the state a lot of boxes. And for many years, none of these boxes would touch the other boxes. You're going to find out today that we've actually got boxes that are starting to touch each other and that they are starting to connect the big picture, which is what we've got to do to solve problems on this. So do want to make a brief opening statement here, but I'll let the co-chair go first if she'd like to make a statement. Okay. This is the first of 4 public meetings of the Joint Study Committee authorized by the Senate resolution, and it's going to call for the exploration of more efficient, effective, and transparent ways to both collect and learn from the wide range of data obtained by the health and social services programs provided by the state. including potentially those managed by subcontracted entities. Every year, our state government collects literally millions of distinct pieces of data in the normal course of the operations of these programs. We also spend close to $1 billion each year performing that collection and any subsequent analysis of the data collected. So we want to find out, are we doing the most efficient job of collecting this? And are the same data elements being collected multiple times across multiple agencies? And can we streamline and user-friendly and have a cost-effective approach to this? Because at a time when organizations such as Google and Amazon owe much of their financial value to their collection and analysis of data, we must, as responsible stewards of the public trust, also look to maximize the value of the data we collect. We must also recognize that as public servants, we must tirelessly protect both the confidentiality and the privacy of that data. And here we need to take a moment to recognize the work done last year by the SR 360 Study Committee on Data Security and Privacy that was chaired by Senator Thompson, and Senator Beach was a member of that as well. But this study committee on transparency and open access in government will examine opportunities to improve the value of this data that we're collecting at the state level, both by increasing the efficiency of that collection process wherever possible, and also we want to increase the availability of that data collected for the public and policy programs on a more comprehensive basis. So the overreaching goal of these efforts that we have today are going to be to produce a report for the legislature for the 2018 legislative session, a report that contains recommendations to be included in any potential legislation addressing the core issues of increasing transparency of programming results and improving ready access to data across multiple agencies for better analysis. So we've got, in addressing this, three main objectives. The first is what we're going to do today. We're going to learn about the current and the proposed efforts within Georgia, both at the state level, and there's some going on at local levels too, which have the same goal as what we're after. The second is going to be to explore and learn from the efforts of other states and jurisdictions, including our neighbors in South Carolina, Florida, and Virginia, as they've been seeking to improve the value of their front-end data collection and, what's important to me, the back-end analytical investments. In this particular effort, we're going to be greatly guided by Georgia's participation in a learning collaborative on so-called integrated data systems that's going to be conducted by the University of Pennsylvania and supported by a grant from the Annie E. Casey Foundation that will put us with other states, and we'll have someone speak to that for a couple of minutes. And our initial involvement with this collaborative has already helped us to identify a set of key issues to be explored, which do include the confidentiality and privacy of all this data through a robust de-identification and anonymous aggregation process. And then the final objective of this study committee will begin to make specific recommendations concerning the structure and function of such a system that covers all the health and social service programs at the state level. We're going to be guided by our current experiences in Georgia, by the presentations that are going to be made at these public meetings, and by lessons learned through our participation in the University of Pennsylvania Learning Collaborative. And first and foremost, of course, by our belief that any such recommendations must be absolutely in the best interest of the people of our great state. If you'd like to go ahead and...
Well, good afternoon again. You know, I certainly support everything that Senator Huffstadler has just shared with you. I personally, though, feel this is such an exciting time, and this is going to be an exciting conversation. I do believe that. The time is right. The time is right now. And I think that we have seen some success occur where we're beginning to have some real conversations going amongst agencies that need to have access to each other's data and do that in the most profound and proficient way that they can. But I also think that this is the right time to not only look, but to find the pathway and access for all of us to help, not only to help our agencies communicate with each other better, to help them communicate with us, but also just to help one another throughout our state. Our citizens also would like access to certain measures, and we need to make sure that they are protected and private, as you said. But I think it's a time now to embrace the opportunity and to help build that trust and faith in all of Georgia and her people. So I look forward to working with all of you and learning today particularly. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair Dempsey. Before we begin with the agencies, I wanted Dr. John Bartlett to take just a couple of minutes. He's been affiliated with Emory, worked with a lot of companies around the country, and has been, he is the liaison with the University of Pennsylvania on the grant that we received. So I know you're over there. If you want to come up to the mic and take a couple of minutes and tell us about that.
Thank you, Senator Hofstadler. Thank you, Representative Dempsey, and thanks to all the other senators and representatives on the study committee for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the University of Pennsylvania Collaborative that Georgia is going to be a part of. The collaborative is basically going to take place over the next couple of years, and it's going to allow Georgia the opportunity to participate with other states and large regional jurisdictions like Dade County. And again, Senator Albers, I appreciate, they should all be in our thoughts and prayers right now. My son is actually in the Coast Guard in St. Petersburg, and he called me yesterday and said that the plan was to take the ship out, drive pilings into the bottom of the bay, and ride the storm out. So we shall see. But at any rate, I think that Dade County is going to be one of our participants in the cohort that we're going to be in, and hopefully our thoughts and prayers go out to all of them. Integrated data systems are basically platforms for the aggregation and analysis of existing administrative databases. They provide the opportunity for cross-agency collaboration and exploration of both the direct effects, such as the cost and the utilization of public policies and programming as they affect a single agency, but they also allow for the examination and analysis of the indirect effects of that policy or programming decision on other agencies and other entities as well, in the areas of cost, outcomes, etc. Whatever the administrative databases has can be aggregated into the integrated data system and used to analyze the direct and indirect effects of public policy decisions and programming decisions. The University of Pennsylvania initiative has, over the last number of years, probably a little bit over a decade, supported through education, consultation, and collaboration a number of state-level integrated data systems, including those, as Senator Hofstadler said, in our neighboring states of South Carolina and Florida, as well as the Commonwealth of Virginia. The current Learning Collaborative, of which Georgia will be a part, will basically double the size of the participating public entities in the initiative to about 30, including such states as California, Colorado, Utah, New Jersey, Delaware, and again, Dade County. The establishment of these integrated data systems is a major issue in current public policy discussions at the national level, at the state level, and at the regional level. I'd only note the Commission on Evidence-Based Policy, established in 2016 on a bipartisan vote, sponsored by both Speaker Ryan in the House and Senator Patty Murray from the Senate, as well as the bipartisan effort initiated a number of years ago by two former OMB directors, Mitch Daniels, who worked for President Bush, and Peter Orszag, who worked for President Obama. This is not a partisan issue. It's a policy and effectiveness discussion. The latter, the initiative started by Peter Orszag and Mitch Daniels, is known as Moneyball for Government. They have a very interesting and rich website that I would recommend to everybody to take a look at, moneyballforgovernment.org. And the title clearly comes from the movie about how the Oakland Athletics, which had one of the lowest salaries in baseball, used data analytics to become competitive with teams like the New York Yankees by basically analyzing the effectiveness of players in different situations using big data to make some intelligent decisions about who they wanted on their team. As Senator Hofstadler noted, the relationship with the University of Pennsylvania has already benefited our thinking about the role of such an IDS here in Georgia. It has introduced us to the benefits of collaborative data analysis across agencies, including, for example, from LA County, where LA County was able to save $20 million a year by looking at homeless people and getting them onto SSI, SSDI instead of general relief from the county. So it saved a lot of money. The other thing is that helped from the University of Pennsylvania, received help from the University of Pennsylvania to identify a number of substantive issues such as governance, how do we manage the agency, where do we place it, the robustness, ensuring that the de-identification process, which is a statistical process, is robust and protects the confidentiality and privacy of all the data. South Carolina uses a 10-item de-identification process that achieves about 99% accuracy across multiple data sets, so that they know that with 99, even 99.5% accuracy, that this data element from this database is from the same person as this data element from another database. 99.5% is good enough when you have really, really large N's, like the data sets that we'll be working with here in Georgia, and they already work with in South Carolina. In ending, I'd only like to add that based on the experience of other states and the Learning Collaborative host, the University of Pennsylvania, this does not need to be a multi-year, multi-million-dollar IT project. I say that for two reasons. First of all, because integrated data systems rely on existing administrative databases and avoid all the cost of building and collecting and aggregating data at the individual client level. We're using big secondary databases that already exist. Secondly, the analytical approaches used by the integrated data systems for collaborative analysis across agencies are already in common usage both nationally and here in Georgia by organizations such as the Andrew Young School at Georgia State, Georgia Tech, UGA, Kennesaw State, among others. They're proven analytic approaches that are already used. So it's not a big multi-year, multi-million-dollar IT project necessarily. In ending, on behalf of the folks at the University of Pennsylvania, I'd like to express their excitement, and they are very excited, about working with the agencies and the legislative and executive branches here in Georgia in the establishment of a robust integrated data system for the people of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. And that did remind me that yesterday I learned that Kennesaw State University now is beginning a PhD program in data analytics and data science, which I believe is going to be the first one in the country. So it's coming whether we want it to or not, but I personally want it to come because I think there's a lot of benefit from it. So we'll go ahead and hear from our Georgia Technology Authority. Steve Nichols is the Chief Technology Officer, and he's going to tell us a little bit about where we are right now. And you can sit at the table if you'd prefer that. That would certainly be good.
Thank you. I'm Steve Nichols. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the state of Georgia. I work for the Georgia Technology Authority. I should point out that Calvin, the state CIO, is actually my boss. He has a dual role as the Executive Director of the Georgia Technology Authority. Jeff McCord is our legislative liaison. He's going to be passing out copies of the presentation and a glossary, and also working the slide deck. Next slide, please. Before I dive into data sharing, I just wanted to spend a few minutes giving the committee an overview of what the Georgia Technology Authority is and what we do. We're a state authority. We don't get any directly appropriated funds. We bill agencies back for technology services, and those the bills that we're levying on the agencies, they're getting the budget loaded, or getting the funds loaded directly into their budget. Our mission is to take an enterprise approach to state IT. We do that through running centralized IT infrastructure, and also by consulting with agencies and giving them advice, and that includes a centralized data sharing service that I'll be talking about a little bit later. We don't have any authority over the legislative, judicial, Board of Regents or constitutional officers. We're just covering the executive branch of state government. And GTA is governed by a board with 11 members appointed by the governor, speaker, lieutenant governor, and an ex officio member from the judicial branch. Next slide, please. So the enterprise approach to state IT, it's primarily through consolidation, as at the sort of the network layer, running, really being the ISP for the state, running wide area networks, local area networks, and voice systems. It's pretty well 100% consolidated. We do that through an outsourcing agreement. So our partner AT&T actually provides all the hands and feet for that. So virtually every agency in the executive branch is getting network and voice services from GTA. If I go up a layer and talk about data centers and servers and desktops and laptops, it's still somewhat consolidated, but only about 70% consolidated. So all the large agencies and many of the agencies we'll be hearing from today are getting their servers managed by GTA, but there's still a number of small and medium-sized agencies that are running their own servers. And then finally, at the application layer, that's all decentralized. So every agency is responsible for their own applications. And for this committee, that also means they're responsible for to be stewards of their own data. They're the owners of the data. And GTA's role is more of an oversight role in setting standards and policies around how they operate that application layer. We have a couple of other functions. We also have the state cybersecurity function sits in GTA. So my coworker Stan Gatewood is the Chief Information Security Officer for the state and runs that program. We also run the Georgia.gov state web portal. There's about 85 public-facing agency websites that we host. We run the 1-800-GEORGIA contact center, and we also act as the liaison between local law enforcement and the FCC to coordinate radio frequency assignment for public safety radio. Next slide, please. So just drilling down into this delivery model, I don't need to spend too much time on this slide. This is really just kind of a graphical representation of kind of that layer cake I just talked about, where at the bottom with the actual pipes and the transport, it's all consolidated under GTA's management through AT&T. In the middle, partially consolidated, so like I said, about 70%. And we do that through partners like Capgemini, IBM, Dell, Xerox, and Atos. And then the agencies are responsible for managing their own applications. And some of them do that with state staff, and in other cases, agencies have outsourced the operations of those applications. So let me move on then to talk a little bit about the data sharing service that I mentioned that GTA provides, which generically kind of comes under the industry term. It's an enterprise service bus, or an ESB for short. So this is just a special kind of technology or special kind of software used to share data across a large number of different systems. And I'll get into all the feeds and speeds here in a couple slides about what it does. But if I could get the next slide, Jeff. The reason you would want to have one of these ESBs, and in that previous slide you saw it's kind of sitting in the center, and it's what is sometimes called a hub and spoke model, where it just has one spoke out to each of the major systems, is if you're running a really complex IT infrastructure. If you're just doing some simple data sharing between a pair of systems or maybe a trio of systems, like on the left-hand side of this slide, it's pretty straightforward. You don't need any fancy software. People write those interfaces all the time. When you start looking at larger numbers of systems that all need to interoperate, the numbers get pretty staggering in a hurry if you're talking about 20, 30, 40, 50 systems that might all need to talk to every other system. So people implement these enterprise service buses as a way that it centralizes security and allows you to provide some standard measures of reliability of getting the data from point A to point B. But it also saves the problem of having to support, maybe dozens of interfaces or, specific connections on one system. You just write your interface once to connect to the enterprise service bus, and it handles all the complexity. So some details on the enterprise service bus. We've been operating this as an enterprise application since 2003. We use Software AG's Web Methods product, so that's a specific commercial product. There's several other great commercial products out there. That's just the one we happened to get when we RFP'd for this. We're supporting about 150 different data sharing interfaces across roughly 35 different trading partners. And I'll give you the eye chart in a minute to show you who they all are, but it's a mix of state agencies, third-party or private companies working on behalf of state agencies, and then there's also a number of federal agencies that we share data with. Again, the reason to do this, you can kind of think about it as an analogy for like the Postal Service. If you're just delivering mail inside an office building or an apartment complex, you don't need the U.S. Postal Service. If you're going to have far-flung systems across multiple data centers, multiple states, then it starts to make a lot of sense because we can do things centrally like retrying if one of the systems is down to make sure the data actually gets delivered. If it's something like a financial transaction where you don't want to deliver it more than once, we can guarantee once and only once delivery. We can handle non-repudiation, so we can show the audit trail that the message was delivered, again, if it was something like a financial transaction. And we can also scale to millions of transactions a day, so this enterprise service bus is certainly handling more than 1 million transactions a day, and we can also guarantee some uniform minimum levels of security. Next slide, Jeff. So this is completely an eye chart. I don't expect anyone in the audience can read this tiny font, but suffice to say there's a couple dozen agencies that are all plumbed into the enterprise service bus today that are sharing data. Then there's a laundry list on the right side of the different federal programs because the feds also don't want to write a bunch of individual interfaces to all the different state agencies they need to talk to, so they'll usually designate one agency in a state to be the clearinghouse for all the other state agencies. So in most cases, that's GTA, my agency. And then in the lower corner, there's a list of some of the third parties, the private companies that are working on behalf of other agencies that we're also exchanging data with. So let me give just some examples of what this data sharing is, because I know the purpose of this committee is more looking at big picture analytics, and a lot of what we're doing is actually much more transactional in nature, so I guess I want to be clear about that. So the kinds of questions that why applications need to share data with each other, I just sort of gave you some samples. These are all real transactions that ride on the bus today. So asking, does this social security number really belong to this person? Does this driver's license really belong to this person? If you're a trooper or local law enforcement and you pull up your Panasonic Toughbook, you might run a tag and say, who owns this car? Do they have a warrant out for their arrest? Do they have a record? Is there anything that I need to be concerned about? So there's a sort of a whole laundry list here, but most of these are queries where a system needs to know something that might change rapidly from one day to the next, and it reaches out through the bus to ask another agency, hey, is this true, or can you tell me more about this, given something like a driver's license number or a social security number. Next slide, please. So no discussion of data sharing would be complete without a discussion about all the reasons we can't share data, and there's a zillion of them. So I think you're going to hear some of that a little later today from the other agencies, but at least for GTA's customers, probably the big 5 things that we worry about are regulations around federal taxpayer information. That's regulated by IRS Publication 1075, so there's a lot of rules about what we have to do to secure the data, encrypt the data, under what conditions it can be shared. For law enforcement data, anything we get from the feds is subject to CJIS, or the Criminal Justice Information Security Policy. That's something that we get from the FBI. Personal health information, whether it's truly HIPAA data or not, if it is related to the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, it's the MARS-E 2.0 set of regulations, which is, you can think of as HIPAA plus a little more. Social Security Administration has their own large set of rules when you're interacting with them. And then finally, for just garden variety, personally identifiable information, we have some state laws on the books around what to do if we lose control of that and suffer a breach, but it also speaks to how we're supposed to secure that. So that's just kind of a sampler of some of the regulations that we have to navigate before any of those data sharing examples I gave on the previous slide can even begin to happen. I want to jump away from data sharing for a minute and just talk about data visualization, because I know in one of our pre-calls we had discussed this and just mentioned that another service that GTA operates on the Georgia.gov portal is we have some data visualization software. This is a screen capture from something that we rolled out for GOSA, the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. That's the sort of the school report card visualization. We have a couple of other agencies that are coming online, 4 other agencies using this. So this is just an additional service that we offer is data visualization. And I think that concludes my the formal part of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee now.
Well, that was a quick overview, but that's what we asked for. Is we're trying to get just the beginning of understanding for all the committee members. Any questions from any committee members? All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you bringing this information to us, and look forward to working with you in the future on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We've got the Department of Community Health up next. That's going to be Joseph Hood, who's the Deputy Commissioner. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Brandy's going to help me with the slide deck, and I think you should have copies of that at your seat. To start off, my name is Joe Hood. I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Community Health. I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Frank Berry. He unfortunately had a conflict with this meeting today, but he sends his greetings to the committee. I've been with the Department of Community Health for a short period of time. I came with Commissioner Berry, so we've been there about 7 months. Prior to that, I was at the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. Probably have worked with many of you in that capacity. I was the Director of Public Safety there for a number of years prior to coming here, developing public safety budgets. First of all, what I'd like to do is talk about the mission, as the Commissioner always likes to start out with this slide, and to remind you of our primary missions. And that's to provide Georgians with access to affordable health care and effective planning and purchasing and oversight. As you all well may know, we manage the Medicaid insurance, and then we also manage state health benefit as our primary 2 highest. In addition to that, we have Health Facility Regulation Division, and then we have the Certificate of Need program. Those are our major components of what we manage as services to the state of Georgia. And through those components, either through regulation or through the state health benefit or through Medicaid or through the CHIP program for children, we have access to generally every Georgian in the state for health access, either through data, through the insurance, or through the facilities that we're regulating. So we really take that responsibility to heart and in our mission statement. Today, what I'd like to speak to you about, and from what I understand the focus of the committee is the 3 large IT projects that the department is undertaking at this time. And of those 3 large IT projects, they all have to do with data and data transparency in one way or another. All 3 of these are federal mandates that we have from the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid, or CMS, as we call it in the acronym. And they're in various stages of procurement or yet to be procured to meet the federal mandate that is set out there at the federal level. So I'm going to go through each of these briefly here, and then I have more detail behind each one. The first one is our Enterprise Data Solution, or EDS, that is being proposed. This is the replacement of our current federally required data warehouse, which houses Medicaid and state health benefit data. So this is our primary source of population health for the state of Georgia for analytics. We've been working on that for a couple of years, and we're pending procurement negotiations, and you'll see a budgetary item in the upcoming legislative session for the matching funds that go along with this particular item and be contingent upon that budgetary planning. The next item that I'm going to talk about is a new federal mandate from the 21st Century Cures Act called Electronic Visit Verification, or EVV for short. This is a new federal requirement for Medicaid that we must be in compliance with for home health by January of 2019. So in that regard, we're working in the request for information right now and foresee a procurement in the near future. And again, this procurement will be dependent upon matching funds from the legislature, and you'll see this as an item in the department's already been submitted, in fact, for both of these, and the third one I'm going to mention, to OPB for our upcoming budgetary year. The last item, although in the initial planning stages, is actually the largest that we have in the state of Georgia, I would suspect, are very close, and certainly at the Department of Community Health, and that's our Medicaid Management Information System, or MMIS for short. There's a federal mandate to replace MMIS systems throughout the nation and to go from an integrated approach. So for example, right now, we have a contract primarily with the company that used to be known as Hewlett-Packard Enterprises that has now been changed through a merger to DXC. That's approximately a $90 million contract that does primarily Medicaid claims and different systems that interact with Medicaid claims throughout the state of Georgia. The new federal mandate requires us to break that contract up into various modules and to have modularity, so we would have multiple vendors and have flexibility between those vendors on their specific subject matter expertise. That will be a multi-year phase-in project and then continue in legacy. We're in the initial planning stages of that project, and I'll talk a little bit more about it further in detail, but we've hired through GTA, through the contract process, North Highland to assist us in planning a strategy on our moves forward there. What I'd like to do now is to move specifically to the Enterprise Data Solution, or EDS. This is the one project that we're the furthest along on that deals with data solutions and population health. I want to briefly have a slide that explains what the federal mandate is. This is a decision support system is what it's referred to by Medicaid. And currently we have such a system in the state of Georgia in compliance, and it's paid for primarily with the matching shares from Medicaid funds. The DSS will be known in the new procurement as an enterprise data solution, and it's a component of what generally in an MMIS system, this would be called a component part. In some states, they have it integrated with that larger contract that I talked about earlier. In Georgia, we do not. We already have a modular separate contract for EDS. But it does not meet the statutory requirements for the new Medicaid mandate for MIS as a whole. So we're undergoing this procurement, and in addition to that, we have a lot of features that we hope to gain by that. What this solution will do is it combines Medicaid claims and state health benefit claims data all into a master database, research database over a 10-year time frame at a minimum. As you can see at the bottom of that slide on number 4, that's over 20 terabytes worth of data and covering over 10 years worth of claims. So it's a master file that we have to answer those policy questions. If you go to the next slide, this is just a little bit of a pictorial to give you an idea of what drives that need. I mean, it's everything from us looking at if we were to encounter a recession or it's predicted in the future, what would be the predicted Medicaid growth from that recession. We can go back from those 10 years and look at the previous start of a prior recession and when we came out of it, and applying analytics come up with Medicaid growth numbers. It would be everything from that to the end of the one that we have on the pictorial of population health management. How can we create better outcomes for pediatric members with asthma? So any particular policy question that we have, given the breadth of SHPP and Medicaid, we should be able to address it through an EDS if we have the proper analytical tools and the proper contracts to accomplish that. Going to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about our current system and why we're moving forward, not only from the federal mandate standpoint, but to have new opportunities for research to answer policy questions that the committee may have and that certainly the state as a whole will have as we move forward with Medicaid and SHPP. Our current system is a legacy system. It's over 15 years old. It's a turnkey system, meaning that it's basically software as a service to some extent that Truvim runs that entire system and maintains it on our behalf. But it has many challenges. It doesn't have integrated tools within the system itself. So if you want to do data analytics, what you have to do is do the query, pull that out, and depending upon what question you're answering, you have to employ another set of tools, third party, that you we procure to analyze that data and then come up with an answer. So we have staff on board, work with Truven to do that. But there's many gaps in that. There's limitations on providing additional interfaces on the legacy system. It's not modular, it's proprietary, so it's not open source. It's not something that we can readily relay to GHIN, the Georgia Health Information Network that we have in place to transfer data today between physicians and organizations. And it's not set up to readily work with our CMO organizations as well, or care management organizations. So lacking that flexibility really puts a lot of parameters on us and slows our processes to answer questions, has a long run time given the query process we have to go through. For example, you might have a month to process data, to get an answer before you can come back. That's not really what you're looking for as a legislature. When we're in recession, you're going to want a much more immediate response. With a new system, if we'll go to the next slide, we're looking to overcome that, but we've gone 2 years through this procurement process. It's still under negotiation. We've worked with GTA and DOAS to bring it about and come up with an effective contract, we hope. In the near future, we'll hope to do a notice of intent to award, but then we won't be initiating a contract until we go through the budgetary process, of course, even though we have CMS approval for the 90% share of the initial development and implementation of the contract. We will need the 10% share that will come from the budget appropriations in the upcoming year, and then the remainder of that will be 100% funded by SHBP for the portion that's specifically related to the health benefit plan and does not comport to Medicaid. But we as a state receive a huge advantage of that, because by basically piggybacking off of the Medicaid framework and what we're accomplishing there, SHBP is basically an interface where we're feeding the data and only paying for the related part that's for SHBP, and then as a whole we have all of population health for the two combined. We're very hopeful that this would address many of what we need for real-time tools in response to data queries. Before I leave that, I will say, just as a reminder, it is a long process to do a new system and to come off. The anticipation is from the point that if the legislature were to approve and everyone had the approvals in place, it would be 18 months during development and initiation of parallel running with our existing system before we'd be able to start anew with the new system and have the full access and benefit of that program. Going next to EVV, electronic visit verification, really goes to the heart of transparency in a lot of ways for data. This is a system that was in place and has been an early adopter by many states prior to becoming a mandate at the federal level for Medicaid. For example, in Florida, they've shown that they've had great success in preventing fraud by implementing EVV, and that largely drove, to my understanding, much of what the federal mandate was to have it instituted for a Medicaid program requirement. What it basically does is, I think of it as what you see with UPS or Federal Express or Amazon. It can track exactly when the service is delivered. So it's basically an app or GPS-enabled device that goes with a home health service provider and tracks when that person arrived, allows them to input the service provided, and then tracks when that service ended in real time, and then does that over, a cell phone connection or what have you. And if that's not available, what would happen is it would capture the time and date of the service, but at the next opportunity for cell phone availability, as that person comes into coverage, it would transmit that into the database. So we have that today, as Steve talked about earlier, with our state troopers. They have that when they do citations or incident reports with their data transmission over Verizon. It would work very similar to that. There are many different vendors who offer this system in the nation. We've seen different ones. They've provided presentations. Since it is a requirement that we have it in place by January 1st of 2019, we're moving very quickly to have all of our procurement data ready. We anticipate doing requests for information, working up qualifications, all in anticipation of going through the session and receiving the matching share that would be required, and then being ready to implement as soon as possible. Due to the timeliness of this requirement, you'll see this both in the amended and in the full big budget so that we can meet this requirement. Moving next, as I mentioned earlier, our largest initiative is the Medicaid Management Information System. As I referenced, this is a large program. It has over 1.8 million members for Medicaid. That's over 100,000 providers in our state with claims of more than $9 billion per year, as y'all are well aware from budget discussions every year. The core MMIS consists of 19 applications and is supported by another 30 that provide those various services that are there, the primary one being Medicaid claims payments. With this system, an integrated system, it's going to take quite a bit of time to develop different modules to do that and to break them apart as you move forward. What is really different in this system, as you may well imagine, is what you'll have a systems integrator platform, or one provider who would provide that system integration, and then you would have multiple vendors, maybe up to 6 to 8 different vendors that would provide each individual module that would integrate into a systems platform. So today, where we have one integrated piece and then we may have subcontractors through that, we only manage with one vendor. So it's quite a different dynamic. And with that, we've employed North Highland to look at the national scheme and help us with GTA's assistance in developing a strategy to move forward. When I recently went to Baltimore for the national conference on this, we went to a very good session that informed us that no one in the nation has hired a system integrator yet and started down this procurement. So almost all of the states are in the same boat. Many of them may be a little bit ahead of us, but there's no one state out there has fully complied with CMS requirements or has come forward with a compliant system that has been certified. So we'll be looking and progressing with our counterparts at the same level. The requirement is initially that we have a new system in place that is compliant by 2020. Our current system that we use with DXC is federally funded primarily, 75-25, and it is set to expire in 2020. So we'll have to show significant improvement in moving toward a modular platform that I've described in order to gain a contract extension, or we would have to have a completely new certified system by 2020. So again, that's why you'll see some matching funds recommended in the departmental request to accomplish this. The big advantage, moving forward to the next slide, I'm going to skip over, I've talked about the 2015. Go to the last slide. The big advantage to the federal mandate is that we'll get 90-10 matching. So 90% of the development of a new MMIS and all the pre-planning is federally funded, with only 10% matching coming from the state. This offers us a lot of opportunities for innovation and competition for those individual modules, gives us the ability to adapt new policy areas, new federal opportunities if there are changes to Medicaid, for example, into that system. And in the end, giving CMS's vision on this, it gives us the opportunity for competition for individual modules. So their idea is, whereas today they have to go state by state and pay for one individual change in maybe 50 individual customized systems, they now would be able to change one module that they hope will be employed by multiple states. And there would be a cost efficiency by only changing it in one vendor's module who would be across many different systems. That's yet to be seen if that's actually how it's going to be implemented, but that's certainly the vision, is to get singular modules that change and not whole integrated systems for a single change. That's a lot of information, I know, for 3 large IT projects. Those are the largest ones we have for data. They all qualify for the large IT initiative that was passed by the legislature that will have oversight by the commission, which would include GTA, the Department of Administrative Services, and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, and certainly the legislature. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So it's obviously being driven by the federal government. The inevitability of it is kind of what we've talked about, that it's heading that direction.
Yes, sir.
But now these aren't over different agencies of the state. There is that potential in the future. I would hope that we could bring in, when we're doing the data analytics on the back end, we could bring in, as well as health information, foster children, education, juvenile justice areas that would help us to do better data analytics. I don't know if there's any eye towards that or not in this.
So on the EDS procurement that we're talking about, which is the 10-year history where we primarily do analytics on population health, we're limited today to interfaces. I believe it's something like 23 or so. We're really at a maximum of what we can do on the legacy system that we have. It's my understanding on the new integrated platform, if we are able to contract for that and be successful, it would be over 80-plus interfaces that we could accommodate. It would give us a lot more room for growth and potential for what you're asking.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Well, I'll let you ask him that. Go ahead, Senator Underman.
I was wondering if you have, and I don't understand why it takes 2 years to get an RFP and then 18 months to start it. I mean, you're talking about essentially 4 years, right?
You are.
Yeah.
You are.
I come from a different world, but I still don't, it's hard to comprehend that. But anyway, can you tell us the cost of the different programs? I know you said some are in the amended budget, some are in the big budget, some of them are out, so you may not know, but what cost are we talking about?
So what I can speak to is the matching funds that are proposed for the EDS, for example, are in the big budget, and the current projection on that and what was requested was $3.6 million. I will say that is a projected cost. We've not signed a contract for that, and that's in negotiation. So we have to meet our time frame,
Right.
and so that's our estimate of that. The other two are also estimates because we haven't even started the procurement on either the MMIS or the EVV. On the EVV, we have other states which we've looked at. We've used another state's estimates to come up with the figures that are in the amended budget and in the big budget. And I apologize, I don't recall those off the top of my head. I remember the 3.6, that's the largest amount that we're seeking. The last one is $1 million, which is simply for planning and development for the strategy to move forward in concert with the federal government for the MMIS to work up to develop that. That will be an ongoing multiple procurement process. So I understand, I want to speak to briefly what you're talking about on the time delay, particularly on MMIS. It's my understanding that that doesn't exist in any form today and anywhere in the nation. So as you're procuring that, the vendor response that we got when we went to the conference was, we're not sure what we're going to be selling you because there's not an example yet that has been certified by CMS to meet their needs. They've outlined specifications of what they think it will look like, and they're undergoing certification to pre-certify examples of that, but none of that has been accomplished, even though they've outlined a definitive due date and they've approved funding to start on the procurements. So I think that's the unknown processes of knowing what you're trying to meet and not having examples of that previously, particularly in the MMIS, are going to make it a long period transitioning from a legacy system to this new modularity. The others, that's particularly, they're big data sets. They drive a lot of competition for large programs. I can't really speak to the cost specifically on those until we sign at least an NOIA. That should be forthcoming very soon. And as soon as it does, I'll be happy to follow up with you, Senator.
Any other questions from the committee members? And all of our IT experts, always feel free to jump in there. That's why you're here. Okay, let's see. That's going to be number 6. Go ahead.
With the new modular system, is the timeliness of reporting to the federal database and the availability to researchers through ResDAC going to be more timely than, you can get them quarterly now, but yearly is what you have to wait on. You're a year and a half, 2 years behind. Speaking to timeliness of...
So it's difficult to say because that some of the discussions is what will be the extent of that modularity and what will CMS, what will they allow you to accomplish? And that's one of the big factors that we've got to plan to and then see where we come. So I've heard as many at one time as 20 modules down to maybe 4 or 5. Will they let us keep a core of the existing system? A lot of that goes into, to answer your question, it's really, I haven't seen an example. It's hard for me to respond. And going to the research database specifically that I was talking about on EDS, that is much more timely. That would allow us, where we have a lag time today in receiving data of maybe a month, or the data we receive into that system is a month old when we get it, it would be reduced to a week under a new system, and then the timeliness on analytics is much quicker. I mean, it's, in some instances, it'll be instantaneous. So I know on the research side, on that particular project, the answer is yes, but on the claim system, I really don't know the answer to that. too many unknowns at this point.
Thank you.
Senator Albers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will talk offline because
Yes.
I do work in the technology industry, and 2 years to do an RFP is 1 year, 6 months too long. But are you working with other states as far as what they're doing and best practices? We don't want to reinvent the wheel if someone is ahead of us.
Certainly, and that's one of the reasons that we've engaged North Highland, which is working across many states, and certainly when we went to the national conference and we visit with other states, both CMS, vendors, and states, and we look at best practices that are being supported by CMS, and we're definitively doing that.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions from the committee? If not, we certainly appreciate you being here and looking forward to working with you on these in the future.
Thank you, sir.
All right, next we've got the Department of Public Health. Dr. Drenzik is here to speak to us. Let me turn that podium mic back on. If that's where you want to work from, that'll be fine.
Well, no, I didn't see that you were, that it wasn't up. There
Thank
go.
you.
Very important that your area was.
Chairpersons and members of the committee, my name is Dr. Sherry Drenzik. I'm the state epidemiologist here in Georgia. I work for the Georgia Department of Public Health. And on behalf of Commissioner O'Neill, it is a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And as you all may be familiar with, or perhaps not, the Georgia Department of Public Health has a vast array of data collection systems and data that we use. We essentially are data. So in the short time that I have with you for my testimony, I decided to really just show you one example of some data system improvements that we've made using other data sources, focusing on the data that really forms the foundation for public health action, and that is disease surveillance data. So we'll talk a little bit about how we're approaching improving our disease surveillance data. First of all, as a matter of background, when we're thinking about the Department of Public Health and public health system in Georgia, our mission is to monitor and protect the health of our citizens here in Georgia. And we do that with these 4 broad ways. And the primary way is that we conduct disease surveillance. We're responsible for monitoring the health of our communities and identifying any community health problems. And supporting that disease surveillance, we offer laboratory diagnosis, and we conduct investigation to figure out what are the populations at risk for these health conditions. What can we do to prevent these health conditions? And so ultimately, all of the data that we collect, again, for surveillance, is ultimately used for action. It is ultimately information for action, not just for collection and analysis. So ultimately, all that we do in public health in regards to control, mitigation, and prevention, which includes allocating funding, developing policies, developing programs, is founded upon, again, accurate and, again, scientifically sound data. So how do we do disease surveillance? And there's a variety of ways to do it. We have a core surveillance mechanism where we rely upon healthcare providers to notify us about disease conditions that are considered reportable by law to public health. That's our backbone, or it really can be considered sort of the framework of disease surveillance. But if we think of the disease status of all of Georgia and all of Georgians as sort of a puzzle, we need a variety of the pieces of the puzzle. So we can't rely on just the frame. We have to fill in the pieces and fill in the colors with a variety of other data sources and other surveillance systems. So in the short time I have, I'm not going to be able to cover all of these, which all have a variety of different types of data, but we're going to at least start with our foundation, which is called notifiable disease surveillance, and talk a little bit about some of the data sources that we've used to improve that surveillance. So notifiable disease surveillance, again, ultimately there is a list of greater than 70 conditions that are considered notifiable by law in Georgia to public health. I realize that you won't be able to see all of these conditions on this list. They're pretty small, but they range from infectious diseases that have very immediate follow-up, like meningococcal meningitis or hepatitis A infections, to chronic conditions such as birth defects or cancer, and everything in between. And we really are designated a time frame in which we want to hear about these diseases. Ultimately, many of them have an immediate public health action. So how do we hear about notifiable diseases from our healthcare providers, from our hospitals, from our public health clinical laboratories, and also from commercial labs? Well, we primarily hear about them in a variety of ways, but mostly, at least for the last 12 years or so, we receive disease reports electronically through a secure web-based system that is called SENS. It is the State Electronic Notifiable Disease Surveillance System. It's an Oracle platform. Again, is secure, so we receive protected health information about individual patients. If they have been diagnosed with one of the conditions on the list I just showed you, they can be reported to us in a near real-time way so that we at the state level at the public health and our county and district health departments also can immediately see about these conditions that have been diagnosed and notified to us. However, we also, over the last few years or so, we still receive some disease reports by phone, some also by fax as well, primarily from laboratories. So one of the ways that we wanted to be able to improve the timeliness and completeness of our disease reporting for surveillance purposes is to, again, initiate what is known as electronic laboratory reporting, or ELR. And again, electronic laboratory reporting is an initiative that extends, sort of well beyond just surveillance. But again, as part of federal meaningful use requirements, we were able to take advantage of that and be able to institute electronic laboratory reporting within our SENS platform, so that now every single day, laboratory results for any of the notifiable conditions are now electronically transmitted into our SENS system daily from many commercial laboratories. And so again, these messages come to us formatted in the standardized way, and they really can be used to create new case records in SENS. So they essentially serve as the disease report for us and have vastly really improved our efficiency, timeliness, and completeness of notifiable disease reporting. I want to show you a really dramatic example. Once we were able to receive electronic laboratory reports for hepatitis C infections in Georgia. If you take a look at this graph, really just the visual alone is all you need. This is the number of hepatitis C reports that came to public health by week from 2013 to the present. So at the arrow, you can sort of see when we instituted electronic laboratory reporting. And you can see this great improvement in the number of hepatitis C reports that we've received, and also the great decrease, if you look at the left side of the graph in orange, of the lag time from the onset of the patient's illness to when we received the report. this allows us, again, to get a much greater and more accurate picture of hepatitis C infections in Georgia, so that ultimately receiving all of this reflects the truth scientifically. So what's going on with hepatitis C in Georgia? Now we know we can have a much more improved surveillance mechanism so that we can figure out what are the risk factors. Where do we need to intervene? How can we control hepatitis C now that we were able to actually see the scope and magnitude of it in a much more timely way? And this is what we found. We were able to actually map out and see where are we seeing concentrations of hepatitis C infections in Georgia and who is most affected. And it turns out that over the last 7 years or so, we've seen a huge increase in the number of hepatitis C infections among individuals that are 30 years of age and younger, primarily in rural areas where you see the darkest red colors here on the map. And the map just reflects 2016 data. But again, it goes to show that once we were able to receive these reports, we were able to dive in deeper to figure out, well, who are these individuals that are 30 years of age and younger? Where do they live and what's going on? What's their risk factor for hepatitis C infection? Turns out to be that very many of them have been involved in opioid overdoses, leading to heroin use as well, and perhaps injection drug use. So that's the risk factor. And if you look at it even deeper, we were able to say that of those individuals that were 30 years of age and younger, we also were able to identify a huge increase in the number of hepatitis C infections among women of childbearing age, and again, the number of hepatitis C infections among babies during this time as well, indicating the potential of transmission from mother to baby. And all this information is most important using this additional electronic laboratory reporting to get to this point where there's an action. Now we can target individuals that have hepatitis C risk factors when they're pregnant so that they can be screened and so that the babies can be tested and treated. My next example is another data source that we've used to enhance our ability to do surveillance in our SENS platform, and that is the use of what we call syndromic surveillance. And really, this data source primarily collects data that is already being collected anyway from hospital emergency departments all around the state, what we call chief complaint data, meaning when an individual presents to an emergency department and describes their history of why they're there. It is collected electronically, and all of these data are actually collected electronically and transmitted into our SENS system every day as well. The chief complaint texts are essentially parsed for symptoms and then automatically assigned to what we call a syndrome. So it may be respiratory illness or influenza-like illness or a rash with fever, or asthma, or overdoses, as a matter of fact. Then every single day we can run sort of a statistical algorithm on these reports, and we're able to compare it to that particular facility. Is this above what they normally see at this time? And it essentially gives us a red flag that we can investigate. Our epidemiologists can investigate, or we can also view data for trends. It's a supplementary system to our notifiable disease reporting. But this data source has been tremendously valuable. And to give you an example of this, that we used it for just this past summer, you may have heard about a cluster of overdoses in the Macon area that were associated with counterfeit Percocet pills. We actually were able to see, if you look at the graph, this red sort of flag on a given day, June 5th, in our syndromic data. So emergency department visits from the hospital emergency departments in our Macon district. We were able to see this large increase that we were able to then subsequently, if you look on the right-hand side, sort of map out and be able to then investigate and look at what were the commonalities amongst these individuals. And it turned out, again, to certainly be a law enforcement issue, that we were able to share this information with law enforcement partners, get the word out about these potentially very dangerous drugs on the street. And again, our syndromic data, I just want to clarify, being very different from our notifiable disease data, which again, we have protected health information. These data are all just aggregate. They're just aggregate data that say this is the number of individuals that presented with an overdose syndrome. So if we want to look in more depth, we may be able to look at individuals, but this is all aggregate data as well. So all in all, I want to conclude by saying there's many, many, many more data collection systems that we have in public health, but ultimately this is our core. The success of any disease prevention or containment strategy, which is our mission, must be founded upon surveillance data and epidemiology. So we're very grateful for the work of this committee in being able to, again, enhance this ability for us, and ultimately allows us to improve our aim in controlling and preventing these diseases and improve the health of our citizens of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. When you receive data, and I know you can't answer this in all the different agencies, but you know, agencies such as law enforcement, community health, CDC, are there primary sources, I guess I would say, of where your information comes from?
Yeah, so what I described for you again today is one of our primary sources of data, which are, again, relying upon disease reports to us. But yes, we also do receive information from a variety of sources. We receive information, again, from our Office of Vital Records, vital records data. We do receive some information from law enforcement. We receive information from what is called the hospital discharge data from the Georgia Hospital Association. It's one of our primary sources of data as well. We receive data from our Department of Community Health partners, and we also look at federal data, like, for example, Medicare or Medicaid data as well.
I noticed when I was visiting some months back with Georgia Tech, their People Technology building, they were using Twitter to help in foodborne illnesses that were outbreaking, and I thought that was sort of interesting.
Yes, it's very. As a matter of fact, if I can just give you a quick example, one of an outbreak that we investigated last summer. We actually noted it from some activity on one of those neighborhood, social media sites, and ultimately in this one neighborhood, it pointed us to a particular restaurant of interest. So, variety of sources out there.
All right. Any questions from the committee? Let's see, you're number 5.
What are the next steps from these? So you've got these great tools that you're using very well, but what's the next steps to these tools?
So what we do with this, again, it's just primarily a reflection of the short time that I had with you today. So we, the second part of our mission, which is the ultimate next step for us all, is for us to share these data with our Department of Public Health colleagues in our programs, so that, again, or other stakeholders that may be, impacted, so that, again, they're able to most efficiently target resources, policies, programs, and can control efforts. And there are a variety of ways that we share and disseminate information, both internally and externally as well.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. What are your greatest challenges with data acquisition and data sharing?
So again, from our perspective in public health, it's a very broad. There are so many sources of data. So again, some of the challenges for us in public health include, if I take it. One of our primary challenges, used to be that it was difficult to get healthcare providers to report diseases, in a timely way or at all. A lot of the electronic technology has helped us in that way. But one of the other challenges that I'll just briefly mention, that I think many of the other agencies may mention as well. So for us, some of our data, is protected health information. So some things cannot be shared, but aggregate, level data certainly can be. And I think that is just something to keep in mind about some public health data. We share only aggregate data, for example, with CDC for national surveillance. They don't ever get any patient identifiers. It's just aggregate data or nothing that can be identifiable.
All right, Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in the telehealth piece of the work that you do. And each of the health departments has the technology to do telehealth, is that correct?
Yes, that is right. And
So in
I
terms of your-
apologize, I'm not an expert in this area,
Yeah.
but I certainly can get someone to get back with you if I can't answer it directly, unless one of my colleagues in the room can as well. Some are here as well. So I'll let you ask, and then I'll find you an answer.
Well, you don't have to answer it right now, but I mean, in terms of your action plan, like what do you do with the data, and how do you get additional data that's on the ground? I just wondered what the role of telehealth is, but we can talk about that offline at another time.
Thank you very much. We will take that back with us.
All right. Let's see. Is that
That's me.
Senator Unterman?
I just had a question. I think what y'all do is wonderful, fabulous, and I appreciate your work as an epidemiologist. But one of the things I don't see public health doing, you collect this data, but it's, in my opinion, over the years, it's not shared as efficiently as it could be, and it's also not real time. One of the things I'm interested in is infant and maternal mortality. We're #1 in the nation, and if you look at Senator Powell Sims' district, some of the highest maternal and to me they're pretty useless reasons of why we have such a high fatality rate. And what I would like to see is you composing those numbers on morbidity and mortality and sharing it with the community health and with DHS, and figure out what we can do better in sharing this data to improve our health matrix, how we can move the dial. And we need to do it expediently. When you look at, we are so sophisticated with 10 million people in the United States that we're the highest in maternal mortality. And I just don't understand why we can't use, because you and DPH is so sophisticated, why we can't move the dial. And to me, sharing this data with these other departments and with the hospital systems and on down, it just seems like it would be so easy if you could do a better job of messaging and sharing the data. Because it does no good for you to be so good at collecting this data, but it doesn't go downstream. It just says, well, we're #1 in the nation. But you don't go to the commissioner of DHS and say what's happening, or you don't go down to the programs of teaching prenatal care. And I know we're doing some of that.
Yes.
But it seems like there's an expediency out there that we're missing out on.
I think there certainly are many opportunities for improvement, and I think that your point is well taken. And I think that one of here in Georgia, we also have a maternal mortality review committee that we work very closely with. I know you're familiar with as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that certainly there are many opportunities to additionally share these data in a more impactful way. So I thank you. I do appreciate that. Yes, absolutely. I'd like to have my colleague, Dr. Laura Jacobson, also address your comment as well.
Senator Underman, thank you so much for that. You know how passionately I feel about infant and maternal mortality. One point of data sharing that I'd like to mention in particular is, thanks to the legislator giving us some funding last year, as well as a grant from CDC, what we're creating now is a system where that Georgia hospital information that we do receive now can actually be processed from both an infant and maternal mortality standpoint and shared back. Our primary audience initially is going to be the hospitals. And the reason for that initially is we're implementing something called safety bundles at hospitals to help address those high rates of maternal mortality here in Georgia that we found from the MMRC committee. And we need to be able to feed back to them information quickly in terms of whether or not this implementation is actually helping. It's going to take some time to set up the system, so we're going to start with a very realistic bite of looking at, for example, how many women are bleeding during their deliveries, what are their outcomes, and if we put these safety bundles in the hospital, can we see a drop in that? So more real-time data information.
Do you feel like that you adequately share DPH's data collection with the other agencies?
I think that's a great question. OASIS is one of our greatest tools because it is publicly available, and that allows you to very quickly see real up-to-date 2016 infant mortality data. Maternal mortality is so challenging to collect the information that it's not as real time. It's usually a year or two delay because it's hard to determine who was pregnant when they may have died or died within a year afterwards. But we could certainly do a better job, and I'd love to hear your suggestions about where specifically we should be sharing that information. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you all for being here and for your presentation, and we certainly want to be able to get you better information to make real-time decisions in the future, if we can be helpful in that. So we're going to move, and we're put a lot on this first meeting, so we'll try to move fast. But we've next got the Department of Human Services, who has been doing a lot of things in this area. Commissioner Crittenden and I believe Virginia Pryor, her Chief of Staff, are going to talk to us. If you would, the floor is yours. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Dempsey and Chairman Huffstetler, members of the study committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. For the record, I'm Robin Crittenden, Commissioner of the Department of Human Services, and my agency oversees 3 integral divisions for the protection and promotion of the lives of our citizens. These are the Division of Aging Services, the Division of Child Support Services, and the Division of Family and Children's Services. With me today are the leaders from these divisions, from Aging, Director Abby Cox, from Child Support, Director Tangela Gray, and the DFAC's Chief of Staff, Ginger Pryor. In addition to work in these divisions, DHS has led the development and implementation of what was formerly known as IES, or the Integrated Eligibility System. We now call it Georgia Gateway. The purpose of this study is to look at ways state agencies are utilizing data and how data is making government more efficient. Georgia Gateway is the largest informational technology project in state history and is a prime example of efficiency in data use and management across multiple state agencies. Along with my presentation today, I've provided a handout for your reference that everyone should have. It's this one. Georgia Gateway is our state's new state-of-the-art integrated system for determining a person's eligibility to receive a number of social benefits. As of September 5th of this year, earlier this week, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP or food stamps, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families or TANF, Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children or WIC, Child Care and Parent Services or CAPS, and our Medicaid-related programs like Aged, Blind, and Disabled, Planning for Healthy Babies, and Peach Care for Kids are all managed through Georgia Gateway. Data is the lifeblood of our system. Without data sharing between the program agencies and our state and federal partners, we would have no way of adhering to state and federal regulations. Georgia Gateway has over 150 interfaces for accessing, submitting, and receiving customer information from more than 40 trusted sources. At the state level, it uses verification data shared by the Departments of Community Health, Early Care and Learning, Human Services, and Public Health. This reduces redundant information gathering and relieves the burden upon customers who, in the past, have been forced to provide the same information multiple times. At the federal level, we utilize data from a number of sources, such as the IRS, Social Security Administration, and others, to verify income, unemployment, disability, citizenship, and other parameters required by state and federal regulations. Georgia Gateway has been years in the making. After we successfully brought our Enterprise Master Person Index, or EMPI, online in March of 2016, this past February, we marked the beginning of Georgia Gateway's implementation phase. As you can see from the map on the back page of the handout, we completed our statewide implementation earlier this week. We have experienced no significant interruptions in service with this new system, despite its complexities. However, one of the federal systems we tie into, the Federal Data Services Hub, experienced its own outage for a few hours. This hub is essential to verifying some of those federally required parameters for determining an applicant's eligibility. This had a critical impact on the ability for Medicaid workers to process applications in Georgia Gateway at the time. While this was not due to any malfunction on the state's part, it illustrated our reliance on the federal data centers. As you may know, these benefit programs are administered by multiple state agencies, which fall under federal regulatory oversight. Nearly every aspect of Georgia Gateway's programs fall under the oversight of these federal entities. The chief federal regulatory bodies for funding and approving Georgia Gateway are the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, known as CMS, and the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, or FNS. These offices govern our system, application processing timeliness, the bulk of the program budgets, and how the state uses data that's provided by the customers. They must review and approve all changes to Georgia Gateway. However, before CMS and FNS review changes to Gateway, these changes must first be approved by our Multi-Agency Governance Council. Leadership from the Departments of Community Health, Early Care and Learning, Public Health, the Georgia Technology Authority, the Governor's Office, and the Office of Planning and Budget review change requests before federal regulators have the final say. This includes, but is not limited to, major system modifications, implementation schedules, and data sharing agreements. In addition, Georgia Gateway's development and implementation funding relies heavily on CMS and FNS. With that funding comes a number of rules like those I mentioned before, as well as additional assurances as the project progresses. Converting from our old system, known as Success, required near constant federal oversight of this conversion. We conduct weekly status updates with FNS and have hosted site visits for FNS and CMS on multiple occasions. Assurances of timely application processing and data integrity were some of the factors in gaining approval for each project phase. The Georgia Gateway Governance Council is committed to adhering to the assurances we've made to FNS and CMS and will continue to provide evidence of our compliance as long as it is required. To give you an idea of Georgia Gateway's reliance on our federal partners, CMS and FNS have provided approximately $222 million toward the new system's development and implementation. Overall, this project has cost approximately $250 million through fiscal year 2017, with a difference of $28 million provided through bonds and state funds. These initial costs will pay dividends to taxpayers. Not only has data sharing and application processing streamlined, but bringing this new system online means the state eliminates the use and maintenance of older systems. Furthermore, Georgia Gateway offers cost-saving features like enhanced fraud detection and paperless notices. Georgia is known for aggressively fighting benefits fraud. This new system's anti-fraud capabilities are designed to allow law enforcement and inspector general teams to attack fraud before benefits are issued. By sharing data across multiple agencies and programs, Georgia Gateway has the ability to automatically detect suspicious information, flagging it for a more in-depth review by investigators before benefits are expended. My department looks forward to providing a report on these specific anti-fraud efforts and other cost savings after about a year of operating the new system. Additionally, our Go Green feature lets customers elect to receive notices only by email. We've had over 260,000 customers choose to go green so far, and we hope to see this feature's use increase. Electing to go green translates to lower postage costs and quicker service to our customers. Now, while Georgia Gateway is the largest IT project in state history, our divisions are also developing or utilizing other data programs in order to carry out their respective missions more efficiently. The Division of Aging Services has designed a program called Harmony that collects data on clients served through our aging network. The Division of Child Support Services utilizes its own case management system called STARS, which assists with sharing data and documents with the court system to improve case accuracy and collections. As I mentioned before, the directors of these two divisions are with me today and will be happy to answer questions you may have specific to these systems. DFAC's Chief of Staff, Ginger Pryor, and her team are also here to provide details of some of the DFAC-specific data use and management. Ginger?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Madam Chair Dempsey and Chairman Huffstetler and members of the study committee. Again, my name is Ginger Pryor, and I am the Division Chief of Staff. First, I'd like to send apologies on behalf of Director Cagle. He is not well, and he has doctor's orders to stay in bed, so we need to make sure that he is okay. So I'm sure he'll appreciate your prayers there. And again, I'm here on behalf of the division to discuss our efforts to improve data collection and utilization in the child welfare arena. The Georgia Child Welfare Reform Initiative, which was made through Senate Bill 138 in 2015, it specifically laid out an intent for certain state agencies in Georgia to share information that would improve our ability to serve children and families in this state, especially those that we consider our most vulnerable. The division has been working hard toward both quick wins and some longer-term goals in that area since Senate Bill 138 took effect in July of 2015 to allow the state to identify, provide, and evaluate services and interventions among the state's most vulnerable children. I want to discuss two initiatives with you today that we believe will help fulfill that intent of that legislation and the enabling legislation that was passed by Senate Bill 168 earlier this year. They include the development of a concept proposal for a data hub and policy lab for child welfare, and second, in an effort to increase information sharing with educational entities to improve graduation rates for our children in care. So the data sharing agreement that we have with the Georgia Department of Education and DECAL, the Department of Education, the Department of Early Care and Learning, and the Atlanta and DeKalb and Fulton schools is what I'm going to talk about first. Last year, we made it a priority to provide a more integrated system of educational support for youth in foster care and have developed data sharing agreements with the state and local school systems to get a better sense of support for youth in foster care and what is needed to help them succeed in school. This began with a project that Director Cagle took on as a part of his Annie E. Casey Fellowship to improve graduation rates for children in foster care. The initiative was called Project Graduate. It involves stabilizing high school placements for high school aged youth in foster care and evaluating their individual needs to determine what services should be put in place toward helping them achieve the goal of high school graduation. The approach included regular roundtable discussions with youth and individuals working with them until they achieved their goal of high school graduation. The project actually started with a cohort of 40 students in the Atlanta area, and we are now building an approach into our education service delivery model to support foster care children statewide based on our lessons learned from Project Graduate. We know that we must prioritize the education of children in our care because we know that education efforts affect their long-term economic well-being, and because we know that children in foster care are less likely to graduate than their peers. I'm sure that you all are aware of the study that shows children in foster care are more likely to end up incarcerated or homeless than children who are not in care. And in Georgia, 11% of youth in foster care graduate high school versus 75% of Georgia's children. We knew that we needed access to long-term and real-time educational data to improve the well-being of children in care. And what we learned in Project Graduate is that understanding the data allows us to make better informed decisions about individual children and in regard to the allocation of funds, resources, and services for children and youth. We've worked in partnership at both the state and the local level with the Department of Education, as I stated earlier, the Department of Early Care and Learning, and the local school systems, including Atlanta Public Schools as well as Fulton and DeKalb. So that the division can better understand and meet the needs of school-age children in foster care, we are already using data in some cases in Atlanta to help us identify wraparound services to provide help to children in care to better achieve outcomes in school. With the Department of Education, we now have access to information through longitudinal, quarterly, and ad hoc data transmissions so that our case managers can have services provided to meet the deficiencies or exceptional needs of our children. We are also working on data sharing agreements with local school systems, starting with Atlanta, DeKalb, and Fulton Public Schools to gain access to real-time educational data for youth in foster care. As we pilot our efforts to increase graduation rates for youth in foster care in the metro area, we are also working with the Multi-Agency Alliance for Children, MAC, and communities and schools. This real-time data will be integral to determining the support children need and measuring their success. Our goal is to eventually achieve a data sharing agreement with more than 200 school systems statewide to gain access to important real-time data. And as I stated, we are already starting this work in the metro and plan to implement to other regions in the state in 2018 and 2019. In addition to working with state and local departments of education, we are already working in partnership with DeKalb to implement cross-agency child data system, which will enable us to better meet the cognitive, development, and early childhood educational needs of children in foster care from birth to age 5. Access to DeKalb's information helps our case managers ensure that the developmental and well-being supports, including early interventions and preventative work, are identified and available for children, families, and caregivers. Second, as I mentioned, I want to share a project with you that is very much in its infancy, but we are pursuing ways to improve the way in which we use data to develop and evaluate policy and implement early warning systems for children in vulnerable situations. Right now, we're working with Georgia State University and the Governor's Office of Student Achievement to explore a data hub and a policy lab concept, which would take data across state agencies to integrate to analyze and evaluate impacts of public sector programs on children and families in Georgia, to design interventions and experiments aimed at increasing effectiveness of our programs. We are building this concept based on the work that several other states, including Arkansas, South Carolina, Rhode Island, amongst others, have done and developed in similar systems. As a part of this concept, the research associates of the policy lab at the university level would like to utilize the data to produce accountability reports required by state agencies for reporting to federal and state agencies, develop customized reports to evaluate current programs. Researchers would also perform micro-level research aimed at evaluating the impact of programs and the development, implementation, and evaluation changes to programs, new interventions, and new programs. As I stated, the project again is very much in its infancy. However, we have been working with GSU and GOSA to explore the concept and determine the best path forward, as well as evaluate potential costs and approaches that other states have taken in similar efforts. As a part of our exploration, Director Cagle and the OPP Director, Teresa McCartney, attended Rhode Island Innovative Policy Lab Conference in June, where a similar project is housed in Brown University. Our primary goal here is to build a technically sound, policy-useful data and analysis unit to improve outcomes for families and children in the state, following the successes of other similar lab structures. So I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to highlight two important efforts and to improve the use of data and its application development of policy at the division. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Crittenden and take any questions that y'all have.
All right, well, thank you all for presenting, and you guys are doing some exciting stuff in a lot of areas. I've gotten a memo here that the Capitol is going to close at 3 o'clock with some of the storm preparations. I'm sure some of you have seen the same thing. So we have just a few minutes left here. So with some of you, we're going to have to continue this later. I did want to see if we could fit in Director Keenan of the GBI, if we could have him present at this time, and then I think we're getting kicked out.
Discussion over data related to public health and social services agencies. So what I want to take my remarks and reinforce Commissioner Crittenden's remarks about the importance of Georgia Gateway. And because this relates to our priority, one of our priorities in Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which is the investigation of crimes against at-risk adults. And at-risk adults are persons over age 65 and persons with disabilities. Now, why is that a priority for us? Well, for number one, the fastest growing population in Georgia is persons over age 65. And in July of this year, the Bureau of Justice Statistics came out with a report which says that persons with disabilities are 2.5 times more likely to be victimized than one without disabilities. So we investigate cases where at-risk adults are being exploited, neglected, and abused. And I want to point out some of the difficulties that we have currently in working these cases and why it is so important that we have integrated data systems. Because when we're working a case involving an unlicensed personal care home where people are being exploited, neglected, and abused, many times we have to go to several different agencies. For instance, Adult Protective Services, Healthcare Facility Regulation, Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, Department of Human Services, Benefit Recovery. Going to every one of those agencies to extract the information because it's not integrated. And then we have to go to the Social Security Administration, many times Veterans Affairs, and the Centers for Medicaid Services. So when you're conducting an investigation, to have to go to that many different agencies to get information is very, very problematic. Now, we know how to navigate that because we're working these cases. But when we talk to local law enforcement and tell them, when you're working your cases, these are the agencies you've got to go to get the data to investigate and prove your case, their eyes glaze over. They're not, unless they're extremely dedicated, they're going to find another case to work. So what Georgia is doing with the Gateway Project is extremely important to law enforcement, and I appreciate Commissioner Crittenden bringing law enforcement to the table, not only so we can go after the fraud aspect, but we can use that information to pursue persons who are abusing at-risk adults. Thank you, sir.
Really appreciate your testimony and support. Any questions anyone has? Chairman Dempsey.
Mine is not necessarily a question, but Director Keenan, I know how many places you also need that information for other work that you do as well. So the suicide prevention effort that y'all are engaged in right now and dealing with all of our children's deaths, like you spoke of, Senator Unerman. I mean, there's so many places where I know you need it. So thank you for your support.
And we hope to be part of getting that information to you in a much more efficient manner and in a one-stop shopping in the future. So we're going to have to stop this. Any quick comments anybody wanted to make before they tell us to leave? We are looking at the date of the 27th as a tentative date. We may have to adjust the agenda because of being stopped short today, but this is definitely I think the toughest meeting, gathering where we're at here in the state, and better times ahead, I hope. So with that, we'll get more information out shortly, and we'll stand adjourned. Thank you for being here.